Our fifth talk is Making an Exhibition of Ourselves, Displaying and Not Displaying Human Remains at the Grant Museum by Hannah Cornish from the Grant Museum of Zoology, University College London.
Thank you very much. So before I get started, in this talk, I will be discussing human remains with reference to colonial violence. There will be no explicit pictures of human remains, not real ones, but please feel free to pop out now if you would prefer. So when the Grant Museum began a redevelopment project in 2023, we had an opportunity to revisit our display of human remains. These were all displayed legally, as the specimens were all provably over 100 years old, but UCL also has an HTA display license, so we could have displayed newer remains if we chose to. The issue was an ethical one, not a legal one. Oh, wrong button. Yeah. So the remains on display were not traceable and therefore had no consent, which is, of course, the case for most human remains in natural history and medical collections. Ours also didn't have much in the way of context either. So we were particularly considering two specimens. One was an articulated skeleton, which was purchased in 1879, and the other a bisected skull with overlaid wax nerves, which was made by Maison Tremond in France in the 1890s. This picture shows the balcony where our human skeleton was displayed, but it's not there anymore. So all of these remains were probably from poor Europeans. But by the end of the 19th to the beginning of the 20th century, it was becoming increasingly common for medical dealers to source their remains, to take remains from people from colonized countries such as India. Of course, consent would not have been sought in either situation. In fact, the only human in a UCL museum who donated their remains with consent is Jeremy Bentham. So with this context of class and colonial violence, not to mention the horror of remains in natural history collections and anthropological collections that were stolen specifically to further the cause of scientific racism, it's obvious why there have been calls recently for all human remains to be removed from display in museums, and some museums have done just that. However, humans are animals, and I think we belong in zoology museums. It's important to represent ourselves as part of nature, particularly at this time of unprecedented human destruction of our environment. Some people want to avoid seeing human remains for personal or cultural, religious reasons. Some people actively seek out human remains to learn more. So are we gatekeeping knowledge about our bodies by removing them from display? We could have chosen to do nothing and leave our specimens on display. We could contextualize them with research, interpretation, and content warnings for visitors, or we could remove them completely. In the end, we decided to remove the articulated skeleton from display with a view to do more research and find out where they were from, and to replace the skull with a high-quality cast instead. So we found that bone clones in America make a range of casts of human remains that were donated with consent to the Maxwell Museum in New Mexico. This seemed like a really good solution, as the models are accurate, they're not real remains, there's consent, and they look really good in our display. However, while writing this talk, I checked back in on their website, and the information on the website had changed to say that some of the collection had been donated with consent. So I contacted Bone Clones, and they said that the Maxwell Museum had noticed an error and told them that some of the remains that Bone Clones were selling had been legally donated to the museum because they had not been claimed by the next of kin, not because they'd been donated with the consent of the individual. So that was not what we were looking for. Those are the same rules that applied to our skeleton from 1879. So our new skull cast is currently in transit back to Bone Clones, and it will be swapped with a cast that is definitely a representation of the body of someone who really consented for their remains to be used for educational purposes. And this whole thing seems to me like it's the perfect example of how working with the dead people in our collection is incredibly interesting, extremely important, but it's never straightforward and it never goes the way that you expect it to. So I would love to hear from you about how you are approaching this in your collections. What decisions have you made? What do you think of the decisions we've made? Did we go over the top by seeking out this cast with consent? And finally, thank you very much. And as promised, this is the Grant Museum team. We're making an exhibition of ourselves here on the balcony where our human remains used to be. Thanks.